Hi, welcome back. This is Andrew Sears again with Cross-Cultural Management going into weeks 3 and 4. And these weeks are some of my favorite for this course. Some of the things you're going to be doing is you're going to be learning how to think about cultural differences across social class and how to think about your cultural differences, how that impacts your role as a bridge builder. We're often, bridge builders between cultural groups. We're going to look at how you can compare the country culture of your current customers to those of your future customers or clients. Apply Hofstedes multi-focus model to conduct an organizational cultural assessment. And then to reflect on the values of yourself, your organization, and the clients that you serve. And then all of that's going to go into your final project in part 2. And as I mentioned before, in many ways this time is meant to be kind of a preview to the big movie where you read or go through all the materials. And in some ways it's also intended to be a summary. So we're going to talk about social class. Often people conflate the idea of social class with just income, but there's a lot more to it, and the paper that I wrote talks about that. Really, there's 4 aspects of class identity. There's your background. This is going to be, what was your social class growing up? Sometimes you might grow up poor, but you might have had significant class access, and then now you might have very high class access. So I grew up poor, but then I went to MIT, and that gave me high class access. Class consciousness is really how aware are you to differences across social class, especially cultural differences. And then class identification. Who do you identify with? There are poor people who view themselves as rich. There are rich people who view themselves as poor. To a certain extent, I think that there's directions on that. I would say that the areas of growth that is presented in the paper. One is in your class background. You just need to understand your unique background and purpose. Your class access, we're trying to help get people upwardly mobile. And, we want to get you degrees so that you have access to, more resources. Class identification, the idea is that we still want to be able to identify with the poor. We want to identify, with the broken. That doesn't mean that we're going to take on all the culture of poverty, but what it means is that there are people. They're not another group that's over there. And then class consciousness, we're trying to become more class conscious. So let me use an example of what I mean by that. Many of you have seen this chart called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And Maslow is a psychologist who he said, if you're missing basic needs like food and water, often it's harder to think about, what your self-actualization is going to be. And one of the main points out of this is that often I would say middle-class organizations and ministries and churches will focus on their needs, and they'll define them as being the spiritual needs, whereas the physical needs down at the bottom of the base are non-spiritual. But the reality is, that's considered by many to be heretical. God covers everything. He doesn't just cover the spiritual stuff on Sunday. He covers everything. So it's important to try to have programs and services in your church and organization that meet all the needs of folks. So, housing ministry, food ministry, that's important to meet the physiological needs. Educational ministry, that's what City Vision's trying to do, is to help people, get jobs. Belongingness and love, small groups, youth groups, self-esteem, leadership development, personal identity development, and then finding your clients around self-actualization. So part of why that's so significant also is whenever you're working in ministry, you'll just have preferences. My wife likes some things that I don't like. She likes broccoli, I don't like broccoli, right? But then across social class, there's there's cultural dimensions that often are going to be different across what I call the dominant class, where that is the upper kind of upper middle class and middle class versus the working class and poor. So, you know, in the dominant class, the focus is going to be on quality. You know, you have to have the highest quality, you have to have the latest iPhone, or, you know, getting it quickly. That's the latest, right? So, but if you're poor, ultimately you got to focus on things being low cost. In a lot of organizations, that are, you know, more dominant class, you know, their focus is on being very structured and orderly. You know, church starts on time, and everything has to be very efficient. Whereas in non-dominant class, it's much more relational. In a lot of organizations, it's much, you know, the dominant class is to be detached and objective, whereas the non-dominant class might be spontaneous and subjective. You know, in dominant class, often it's better to be reserved, whereas non-dominant class might be more intense. Dominant class in the U.S. at least is egalitarian. This varies somewhat across the world. But non-dominant class often, you know, if you're poor, you learn that you got to do what your boss says. Usually, if you're working class, you know, there's just a question of, is trauma avoided or is trauma common? It's just a part of life. And, you know, there's a lot more lower class culture and values that will go into some of these class dimensions that we'll talk about. Now, the most widely used cultural dimensions, though, is called Hofstedes. So this is a complement, I would say, to the social class. And he developed several different cultural dimensions. I'm not going to go into them right now, but you'll do some readings on that. If you want, you can also download some apps that cover this. But what he has done, and, you know, thousands and thousands of researchers have studied cultures across the world. That's part of the advantage you get with using Hofstede, is that it's been used throughout the world, and different countries and cultures have been measured. So, so the assignments for this week, you know, if you're one of those people who likes taking personality tests and things like that, this is going to be fun, because we're going to be doing some tests like that, but you're going to actually be filling them out for yourself. So I'm going to talk through the different assignments for this week. So if you go through week 1, you're going to, you know, see the readings and watch. Be sure you do these readings and watch, because you're not going to be able to do the assignments. Now, it's important to recognize in the watch, there's 2 documents that you're going to need to be able to use in your personal and organizational class profile. So you're going to need to download these documents. So whenever you get to them again, be sure that you download them not as a PDF, but as an Excel file. Otherwise, you will not be able to edit them. Your computer may give you some sort of warning. I've checked this, and don't worry about the warning. There's nothing to be concerned in this file. It just always does that. And what you're going to do is you're going to get one file that looks like this. This is your social class profile, and the other one is going to be the second document, the cultural dimensions profile. And again, download the Excel, and then you can open that up. It's going to give you a warning, and you just say, do you want to open it anyway? Say yes. And then, so what you're going to do here, you're going to read, and you're also just going to think about some of these things. The definition may not be 100% clear, but just try to do this quickly. You know, the way these tests work is you try to do the best you can. So the N column stands for non-dominant class, so that's poor and working class. The D is dominant. So what you're going to do is you're going to go through and say, okay, in relating to others, I actually tend to be more spontaneous, so I'm more aligned with the non-dominant. And then relating to others, I'm relational. But I'm actually kind of, you know, and I'll just say, you know, for all these I'm non-dominant, but I'm very competitive. So I'm going to put myself in the dominant class, right? And you're going to go through that. So what you want to do is you want to understand, how do you operate? And then how does your organization operate? Because that's going to be, you know, I work in an organization where there's a lot of introverts. That's unusual in ministry, but you know, that's something to be aware of. You know, we're very, you know, I'd say our organization's very spontaneous, so you know, thinking through what's your organization's value preference. And then, so say you're a rescue mission and your current customer is primarily, so you're an Anglo-focused rescue mission that is predominantly, you know, middle class, or you know, run by the middle class, or maybe you're run by the working class. And then your client, though, is going to be, in most cases, if you're serving, you know, the poor, they're going to, in most cases, be aligned with the non-dominant. And in some cases, this might be different, though, if you're serving, say, you know, a white client, or you may even say, you know, we're going to serve a different audience. This is, you know, we're going to start serving volunteers, and our volunteers have this preference, or another stakeholder. You know, one of the things that I found is that initially, early on, I said, I'm going to align all my values with our clients' values preferences. And then I found that we weren't aligned with funders at all, so we couldn't get funding. So you have to actually balance your stakeholders. And, you know, one of the optional readings is around how there's a funding bias, because, you know, the rich are going to be the ones who give money, and they want things to match their values. And this isn't, you know, anything intentional, but if you don't have people who interface with them that can, you know, match their values, then often that's going to be a challenge. So often what you'll find is the people who are the grant writers will have cultures that will match the preferences of the funders. And then you'll have other people, your program people, that might better match the preferences of people who are, you know, the client. So then there's other categories relating to the world. So fill this out. This is going to take you a while. And then, you know, you can figure out how many columns you want to do for this. You know, if it's a simple thing like your organization had been serving the African American community, you're going to start serving the Latino community, then you only need to do, you know, your current customers and then future customers, right? But if you want to do a complete map, though, you know, for City Vision, we have to think about our funders, we have to think about the Department of Education, we have to think about our accreditors, and if we became 100% aligned, and this is part of what I found, is organizations that are 100% aligned with their clients usually end up running out of money, and, you know, they're as poor as their clients, and then they can't help them. So, you know, if to be a bridge builder, you have to actually have people on both sides of the bridge, and that's part of the goal of the organization. So then the second part is this cultural dimensions profile. So here you're going to have to really understand what's going on with Hofstedes. I find it a little harder to understand these definitions. These are very precise definitions. And, you know, what is it? How is he defining masculine and feminine? And how is he, you know, defining these different terms? And then you can go through. So all those items, I would say overall, from that social class profile, what you would do is you would average them and say, you know, my preference in general. So this is, you know, for me, my preference is, you know, non-dominant. So, and then the organization's preference might be dominant, and then the client's, you know, preference might be non-dominant, right? And you can, you know, fill this out, and then our funders, you know, are going to be dominant, right? So with Hofstedes, what you're going to do is you can just type the words. You can do high power, low power, and you can try to sort that out. Now, this is Hofstedes. There's also so this is the Hofstede dimensions. Now down here there's a reading related to Hofstede's organizational culture. And in the actual assignment, let me see if I can pull this up. In the actual assignment, there's going to be a read Hofstede's organizational culture. So you're going to go through this, and then you're going to figure out where's your organization. Is it A, B, C, or D? So that relates to this diagram where it says A, B, C, or D. So dimension 1. And just to explain this, it's, you're A if you're going to be in, out of the 100 organizations, you would be the 35 most in this direction. And you're D if you're going to be in the in the 55 to 100 in that direction, essentially. So for each of these dimensions, you're going to try to figure out, how do you work, and to go through that. Now I think they have this culture scan light. Let me see. I think this is, no, that one actually costs money, but you can try to just give your best assessment. They actually have tests that you can do for the organization, but basically what you're going to do is do kind of your best understanding based on the description for these dimensions. And then there's also, what I'm doing here is I'm explaining the sources. So my social class paper is where I explain this. And then cultural intelligence, this is the book. So these things are covered by Hofstede, but they're also covered by the cultural intelligence. And then last week we had you do the culture map. Often different groups will call things something similar, but I wanted to add the dimensions from cultural intelligence, the book, because these are important in terms of other dimensions, and then the culture map, that was in week 1. So are you top-down decisions or consensual? Are you application first or practical? So part of what this is about, you may look at this and say, wow, this is going to be really hard. We're really assessing, do you understand these things? So filling this out isn't just about, what are you? It's, do you really understand these things? So try your best to, study what these things are from these sources. So if you're like, I'm not sure I understand the difference between competitive and cooperative, and then, you can look that up in the cultural intelligence book.